Hello, and you're very welcome to the JMac podcast. I'm John Man. Of course, this podcast is brought to you by orgorich.com. Use my promo code JMac podcast to get 15% off on the website. And if you're liking any of the gear, courses, Kerry jerseys up on sale at the minute, and use my promo code to get 15% off on it. Loads of gear just after Christmas, so get your hands on it. And today I'm joined by Dr. Paul Gaffney. Obviously, Paul Gaffney is a psychologist, and obviously lots of hard work goes into that, working with teams, working with individuals, and he's obviously working with the Cavan GA team at the minute, so lots to talk about there. But so as to start off, Paul, how are you?
Good, John. Thanks. Yourself?
All good, my man. All good. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And I suppose it's the 5th of January. I think Christmas is well and truly over, and we're back into the rhythm of things. So how was Christmas?
Christmas was good, John. We were in Cavan, John, and with some family came down before Christmas and then after Christmas, and one of our nieces was here Christmas Day, so it was good. No, it was just good to get a break, and just nice to catch up with people. It felt kind of normal for the first time in a couple of years, didn't it?
Yeah. No, I think since 2019, it's been the first normal Christmas where people got to see people again, and no kind of COVID stuff getting in the way. But I suppose obviously the work you do and the business of it all, Paul. I suppose you were really glad at the break, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I suppose, high performance sport, John. There's never really enough time, and there's always. I had a colleague who joined Sport Ireland Institute this year, where we look after scientific medical supports to our guarded high performance athletes and teams, and was kind of saying, God, I thought it would have been quieter in December, but of course, if you're looking to qualify for the games in Paris in 24, almost all of those athletes have big events coming up. Some of them have to go to national events, but then many of them are looking at European and other world events to qualify in the coming months. So it's never really quiet, and it's pretty constant. There's always somebody doing something or trying to qualify for something at any time of the year.
Yeah, the hustle never stops, I suppose, Paul. Obviously, it's great from that end of things, and I suppose obviously winding down like last year, and obviously we're into a new year. It's January 2023, so new goals, new ambitions, and obviously everyone that you're involved with, Paul. So I suppose like during your time at Christmas, I suppose it's like kind of managing a team or being involved in anything. Like, how do you maybe switch off in the evening times or maybe get away from? I suppose I wouldn't say the noise, but like everything that goes on in your day-to-day life.
That's a great question, John. Probably for me, I think in many ways what my job is like a lot of people's jobs. It's essentially to go out and meet people and reach out to people or contact people and essentially it's exchange of energy. So you wake up in the morning, you go out and do what you need to do, and hopefully you have enough energy to get you through it. So when you get an extended break like that, what you're really trying to do is, I think, just kind of like a mobile phone battery that hasn't had a proper charge in a couple of weeks. It's to get a proper charge. And for me, I love people. It's great, but I think when you're around familiar people and family, especially, you probably don't have to try as hard because you kind of know the relationship established. You kind of know what to say, what not to do. Obviously, if you're working with people, high performance sports, it takes time to get to know people. It takes time to figure out what's the best way to be with this person. Some people you probably need to talk a bit more initially. Some people you need to sit back and let them talk. So you don't have that kind of figuring out to do. So yeah, just time with people catching up. For me, I suppose I'm a sports nut anyway. I'm very lucky to have fallen into something that I really enjoy and would be naturally doing. So if I wasn't doing this work, I'd be spending Christmas catching up on sports biographies, watching sports stuff on YouTube that I missed during the year, and sports and all elements and every version of it, kind of catching up on that. So a bit of downtime, walking, physically trying to keep in shape. I think one of the things I've learned in recent years is if you're spending your time knocking around high performance athletes, you kind of have to look the part. So try to stay fit, try not to overdo the booze. and try to just practice what you preach. So, but just but it's amazing just even after that cold snap before Christmas, just because they couldn't really walk or go anywhere safely for a week or two, but just being able to go out and walk. And we're blessed here in Cavan with all sorts of nice place to go, try to get to the gym and just to do the kind of regular stuff, but really just give the body a rest, recharge. And but for me especially, I think you're always looking at how can I improve what I'm offering to people, how can I bring added value, what can I do to enhance things. So there's so much stuff out there these days that is be it books you can read, a lot of free stuff, good stuff on YouTube. So you're always you've got time. But even in my downtime, John, I just love sport, and so you'd find me doing that stuff, and it doesn't seem like work because it's such a pleasure.
Yeah, no, definitely the Christmas was a good time to maybe catch up on YouTube or read a few books, or so kind of switch off, Paul. But I suppose definitely, and it is great. And I suppose obviously in being involved with the teams, the athletes, and the individuals, and as I said, it kind of reminds you of being a manager of a team. You're never kind of switch off. And I suppose when you're kind of finished up, like working with like a team or like a professional athlete or an individual, Paul, how does your maybe head switch off from that? Or I suppose it is kind of obviously very much time consuming, but obviously it's very rewarding at the same time.
In terms of, I suppose what you, one of the things I've learned over the years, John, is that like success and failure are in a sense both kind of illusions, because no success is ever forever. I mean, look, Cavan were won a brilliant, unprecedented championship in Ulster 2020, and very quickly life and sport reminds you that just because you've won something doesn't give you the right to win anything else. And in fact, sometimes when you win something, you can hit the ground even harder. So no success is ever final, but neither is failure. And what I've learned over the years is really the mental side of things is a very small percentage of your overall input. I think a lot of people believe that having sports psychology, or people like myself, high performance sport clinical psychologists, that basically that somehow it's like lucky socks, that if you have this, then you're bound to succeed, or if you do this because other teams have done it, you're bound to be successful. And I think mentally, what we're really looking at for every athlete and player, I think the higher you go, the less influence you actually have, is that 1 or 2% to help people in the moment, when the moment comes, because the moment always comes, that moment of truth, that we can help the person stay focused in the present moment, not be overwhelmed by the past, not be overcome by fears of the future. And ultimately, that's an input, it's an energy, and it's a focus you give. But that will finish, and sometimes it finishes with people having been successful and achieving their dreams. Sometimes it finishes with people not been successful and having their hearts broken. And what you realise very quickly in this business is that that's bound to happen. And the more involved in high performance, because the one thing about high performance is if you win, it's very obvious. If you lose, it's very obvious as well. And there's nowhere to hide for these athletes and teams. So I think for me, all I can do is the best I can do. And some of the bits of work that I've done over the years might have been helping people and teams achieve an awful lot, which ultimately ended in failure. Whereas other teams and athletes I've been lucky to work with essentially had great success. My part in that might have been quite small. But I think it's learning the lesson that all you can do is be consistent, put a good shift in, work hard, empty the tank, and after that, it's up to fate. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. So I think the first thing is not being based on the outcome. Yourself, like when teams are on a run, people look and say, what is it that they're doing right? A lot of the times that the reason that people win aren't necessarily to do with what they're doing right or wrong. It's just to do with the whole range of factors that come right when it matters. So I think that's the first thing, is just to make sure that once the input goes in, that's all you can do. I think the second thing is realizing that there's nothing feels like success. I think that one of the great lessons I've learned over the years is that every single sporting achievement, I think if you extend it to life, John, for individual people in their own lives, almost every person I've come across in sport or outside of it, their greatest moments or their greatest triumph or their greatest overcoming adversity or their most happy or content was somehow started in a much darker place, a setback, an injury, a selection, a disappointment, a betrayal. Something went badly wrong, and that process of things going badly wrong enabled the person to look and maybe make some changes, or maybe take some heart, or maybe try things differently. But almost always the success comes on the back of some kind of failure or setback, almost always. There's very few Usain Bolts who always won right from the start and all the way through. So I think it's just remembering the input's all you can give. And secondly, that you have to look after yourself and you have to mind yourself. And I think one of the words that our athletes and players need to say most often is no. And even, the work that I've been doing, you do get asked to do a lot of things that ultimately doesn't fit in with where I would like to see myself going. And secondly, I could say yes just to be pleasant and get through the moment conveniently, but ultimately you're screaming at yourself what to say that for. So actually saying no to things, and it's something that a lot of players and teams, need to probably get better at. We're actually just to give the commitment that players and teams give, especially our GA players, to give that commitment over that period of time. You do have to say no to things, and I think that's a skill that you're always trying to teach. But listen, you got to practice what you preach, and for me that starts with myself.
Brilliant stuff, Paul. And I suppose obviously you've been involved with the Cavan since 2020, and obviously you're part and parcel of that 2020 success and working with the players. And I suppose, Paul, no better year to kind of come in and look after a team from the psychology ends of things, Paul, because it was 2020. You were still in the middle of COVID. I suppose a lot of lads on the team probably would have been going through various bits and pieces, like probably everyone, the whole nation basically was, Paul. So I suppose getting started in 2020 with the Cavan team, I suppose you probably got your eyes open to a degree.
I think so. I think the first thing was probably the level. Andre Quinn would have contacted me, and funny, Andre's from Warren Point in County Down, and he came into Cavan the year before, and I think his methods have had a significant impact on the way the team prepare, and very much fitted in with Mickey's plans. But Andre would have contacted me. The funny thing is, John, that he thought I was in Dublin, and he said, "Would you come up to Cavan sometime?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm in Cavan." So that was the first thing. It was close to home, which was great. I've been in Cavan at that stage for nearly 20 years, so it was lovely to be asked. It was sort of very privileged to be asked, and he'd come through the Sport Ireland connection to do that, which was brilliant. I suppose coming in, the one thing that I was sort of shocked at was the standards that the players had, given that we don't have a centre of excellence as yet. I know that's coming, but just how hard those fellas work. You're thinking of lads coming from sort of Swanland Bar or kind of West Cavan, like say Jason or Porrick, and those lads come from Kings Court. Cavan's a huge county, and as also struck me initially was these lads had got to Division 1, been one of the best teams in the country over many years. And really, we're making sort of huge sacrifices, which they still do. And that was the first thing, because you get used to almost every county has that kind of central point where players come. And essentially, it's almost like a club, as it were. Whereas Cavan had achieved an awful lot with against the backdrop of not maybe yet having the resources that thankfully we are coming into the county board. Have done brilliantly with the county council and partners to get that off the ground. I think the second thing was they're just good lads. I don't know, John, that's what everybody said, but there's an old saying in sport that good people make good players, and I was very struck just by how humble these guys were, how hard working they were, by how open they were to using whatever resource or whatever angle I might have to offer them individually and collectively. And I think that's probably, in my experience, of the very best athletes and people who go on to win national, world, European, Olympic titles, is they're absolutely open to anything. If they think there's something in it for them, they'll try it, they'll give it a go, and they'll see if it works or not. And I think that the Cavan players and management, Mickey and management team, very much had that idea. Let's see, can we get something from it? Let's see what it'll do for us, and let's see how far we can go with it. So in that regard, an awful lot of great work was there. And I think, again, like all these lads, especially the success that many of them had at underage, they're all serial winners. There were fellas who expected to win. They had great success. And I think that was always going to happen. I was fortunate that I joined the journey the year that it did happen, but that was always going to come, and I think it was inevitable that there's too much good football and too much experience of winning, and that muscle, that which is winning becomes a habit. So Cavan were going to do that at some stage. I suppose it was pleasant and timely given the shape the whole country was in November 2020.
Yeah.
That in that magic 4 weeks that they delivered, they delivered what they did. But that was always going to happen. And whether I got involved or not, that was always going to happen. I think what was pleasing was that it happened that year.
Absolutely, Paul. I suppose what do we kind of talk on? Obviously, like sports psychologists and everything, the last couple of years, it's really become a huge part of GA teams, and I'm even hearing GA clubs even starting to get psychologists in. So it's obviously a great plus for clubs and everyone to talk, and we can touch on to the Together Stronger program the Cavan GA ran last year, Paul. But I suppose what's maybe your role, or what are we kind of talking day to day or even week to week with Cavan?
What generally would look like is I suppose, and I'm glad you mentioned Stronger, John, because I think my training was initially in clinical psychology, so it would have been looking after people with more acute, severe mental health presentations, not in clubs or gyms or in hospitals and clinics, that kind of idea. And I was very lucky over the years that I developed an interest and did some writing, because I've always been a sports fan, always been a sports nut, like most Armagh people. My life is divided by before the 22nd of September 2002 and afterwards. That would have been
you're still celebrating. You're still celebrating.
well, again, people talk about 6 in a row and 5 in a row. I think the 1 in a row are the ones to hold on to, but they are. But I think again, I grew up in Katy, and my father would have been a man from a townland close to Katy called Derrynoose, and he would have in the 50s, after Cavan after Armagh got to that All-Ireland final in 53, himself and some friends kind of re-established the GAA club in Derrynoose because of emigration and so on. But one of the things, and I've talked to Cavan about this, talked to the players, is the great pride that he had when the team in Derrynoose started in the mid-50s was that they wore, the kit was all blue, but it was Gaffney blue. And there was a huge sense of Ulster football. Cavan were the giants of Ulster football, of All-Ireland football for many years as well. So we very much grew up under, the idea of hearing about John O'Reilly and all these colossal men from Cavan. So very much that would have been part of my upbringing, that, the GAA was part of family. Again, Katy in in the 1970s and 80s, there was very little safely for youngsters to do. The GAA club was a safe place, and it was somewhere your parents knew you could go where you aren't going to get hassled by the army, or you're not getting involved in anything which could get you into more trouble. So it was a refuge for us, and we all played. I think everyone played, and that kind of was very much part of the upbringing. So eventually to see all for once in 2002, hope and history rhyme, and all the egregious luck that you need in that year, which Armagh had so much of it. But to win an All-Ireland, you need that. You need things to grow out constantly. So I suppose, in a sense, coming into Cavan, that had been part of having that regard, and I think for Cavan kind of coming in had been a big part of it. And I talk very proudly about the Cavan people, because I think the legacy of football in Cavan, I think Cavan are proud football in the county, and I think that's important to kind of start with that, and that from Ulster we would always admire that. So for me, kind of coming in, I initially was a clinical psychologist. I'd written one book particularly that kind of resonated with some colleagues in Sport Ireland. Was a book written in 2014 called On the Ball, How Football Can Help Your Mental Health. And really, John, that came out of necessity, because as we sadly know, we've a mental health crisis in the country. We've had it for many years, and one of the hardest groups to reach have always been young men between sort of 16 and 34, 44, and we know statistically that kind of 16 to 34, that age group, have always been very, very vulnerable, and almost always, in tragically so many cases, young lads could end up taking their lives with absolutely no opportunity for intervention at all at any stage, and often fellas who were appeared to be doing well, appeared to be managing, but there wasn't a chance to intervene, and it was the saddest thing of all. So part of my work as a psychologist, trying to connect with people, I realised in sessions that for a lot of younger men, and mental health services in those days, about 3 out of every 4 people were boys, coming in with certain issues. Don't know if that's still the same, but certainly, and there might have been issues around behaviour. There could have been issues around not wanting to go to school, but there were fairly heavy duty things were going on, risky things for these youngsters. But one of the things they talk about, of course, was football. And if you're trying to establish a relationship with somebody and you're trying to make them feel safe and you're trying to make them feel that you understand them and you're trying to see their side, then finding common ground is very important. So I realised that particularly with lads who are often harder to engage with, that football, and it might have been Gaelic, it might have been soccer, it might have been any kind of sport, but all of a sudden I said to myself, there's something in this. So kind of with some encouragement from a few people, I wrote a paper in 2011 and not got good feedback, so I decided to write this book in 2014. And really was just, talking about mental health and well-being in football language. And it was full of cliches and a game of two halves and 22 chapters, all that stuff. But it did seem to resonate for people. And I got a call in 2015 from Sport Ireland Institute, who look after our Olympic world-class carded athletes and teams. And they were looking at doing a programme for the Rio Olympics at that stage, and Paralympics, because obviously we've had some very sad deaths after Olympics. Darren Sutherland's sad death after the London Olympics. And I suppose people in sport realising that if you bring athletes to the very pinnacle of their sport, you get them to focus for chunks of their life for 4 years at a time at a goal, an end point in Olympic Games, that we've a duty to these people, not just to try to get them there, but to try to get them back safe in one piece. And a bit like Mount Everest, I think the research on deaths in Mount Everest is that more people die on the way back down than do on the way up. It was almost a metaphor for the Olympic Games, that often athletes get into trouble after the Games. There's a well-known phenomenon of post-Olympic blues, because your whole life has been focused on that. So that was kind of where that the guys in Sport Ireland said, we want a programme to prepare people, but we want it delivered in very normal, regular language, so that athletes see it as being credible and that they get some benefit from it. And also, at the time, I'd been working with a lot of young people who were in places like Oberstown Detention Centre, young people who maybe needed to hear the messages and learn skills about life, but maybe weren't that inclined to listen. So they wanted, that approach to be normal and basically to deliver that message against, with groups who might be that bothered, quite frankly. And it kind of went from there then. That programme, the Evolution series, is very successful, but 80% of athletes found it particularly beneficial. So Sport Ireland Institute asked me to stay on as a high-performance sport clinical psychologist. And I kind of went from there then, and then in late 2019, then Andre got in touch and was good in McCavan. So I suppose from like every season, there's a different focus. I think COVID, obviously that first season, Cavan were going well. I think we lost narrowly to Clare in Gaffney Park just before the country shut down. And I often wonder if Cavan had won that game. Promotion to Division 1 wasn't far off at that stage. But anyway, we ended up where we were. We had those two difficult league defeats, sort of hard to take defeats against Kildare and Roscommon, and then we obviously went into the championship. But there was always a sense about that team. I mean, I just think there's so many leaders in that team, and obviously right from Ray, the captain, but all the way through, and from my point of view, because I'd been redeployed then during 2020 to COVID hub and then the testing centre, it wasn't safe to go to Gaffney Park. You just couldn't go. It was just too risky, because it's one of the things that at that time, if you worked with the HSE and the GAA, you're bound to get blamed for something, because these big organisations get blamed for everything. So I couldn't see the players individually. We did a lot on Zoom. We did quite a bit collectively on Zoom, and obviously psychologically talking through games and preparing. But something happened, and that Monaghan game, I think there was something happened that day. I remember talking to Ray that evening, and obviously he was immense that day, and Cavan had won that game 3 times, if you think about it. Went behind twice by 6 or 7 points, and then came back. It was an amazing performance. But I think in Ulster football, I think there's 2 things that are different. People often say, what's it like? And I think you need to have an ability to deal with hatefulness and spite to a point that you probably don't do. You know, any team that's won an Ulster title, you have to manage that stuff. You need to be very disciplined. But the second thing is, if you beat someone like Monaghan, it's almost like winning 2 games. It's almost like there's a bounce from it. And I think especially as Cavan, like, weren't fancy, let's be honest, going in that day. So I suppose individually we went on a roll then, but I remember talking to Ray after that evening and just saying, listen, like, we're onto something here, and you knew you were. So it was a bizarre experience because I could only contact the lads by Zoom. It wasn't safe because the COVID rates were awful. And even the day of the Ulster final, John, I remember it well. I was in duty out in the COVID hub in Ballina, and my colleague Cindy, the deal was you'd have to have all the people of their tests. There's a van would come from the lab to take all the tests, and that had to be scored up and make sure we had the numbers. But Cindy let me away early to go watch the final, and let me land at home. And it was a bizarre thing, kind of watching the final. But my wife, who's a Dublin woman, but kind of knew what it meant and knew what it meant to me, like we were in dreamland like everybody else. But they couldn't go to Breffni that evening because, again, I'd been in the COVID centre, so the lads came back. So it was all a bit bizarre. So so 21 then we obviously got in, we went out, but I think that season was truncated. But the general work with Cavan would be, you know, there'd be a certain amount of team sessions where you would come in. I think part of that's just a fresh voice. I think there'd be a very clear statistical view of how we play. I think that we've an excellent management team. I think Mickey's underrated as a manager and a tactician. I think the team as players. If you talk with Cavan, anywhere in Ireland, you know, and people have a lot of regard for what this group have achieved, but they often say things like, "God, they're very plucky and they're very doughty and they're never beaten." But like, the end of the day, like, you don't get awards for being doughty and resilient. You have to win, and I think that in a similar way that the lads, as good footballers, never really got the credit that they deserve. I think they're a great football team, and they're showing us that. But I think similarly, you know, strategically, probably not given credit either, especially Mickey. I think in terms of the incredible, like, his Ulster championship record's amazing. So I suppose it's a combination of individual work, and you have to, again, Andre and Kieran Callahan, Mark Hall, everyone, there's huge support for that if the players need input, want input, they get it, and that's managed very, very well. And I suppose it's very much a player-led environment, so that's something that the players want, and generally want more of. So kind of that's the way it would work. Individual players, I mean, depends what players need. Obviously there's a confidentiality element, that because if they don't trust you, then it doesn't matter what you do with them. But it's that combination of individual work, and then obviously with the team adding some psychological perspective. And I think there's probably psychologically 2 things, John, that great teams have, and certainly, you know, in Cavan they have it. I think firstly, people have to feel safe. And I think psychologically, if you can by and large create an environment where it's okay to make a mistake and it's okay to muck up, because we're all going to muck up, and the higher you get and the more difficult opponents you play, mistakes are absolutely inevitable. And I think accepting that, first of all, we're going to make mistakes. In fact, the harder we try, sometimes the more mistakes we make. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think just trusting the people around you, trusting the people in the group. I think the one thing for any team, the solutions to all the problems are within that group, they're within the room. And I think those are 2 things, that it has to be safe. It's okay to make a mistake, and it's okay to forgive. You know, it's okay to say, listen, I know I'm going to muck up, I know you're going to muck up, so let's just get that out of the way before we start. And secondly, I think just trusting in the process around you. And again, one of the things I'm proudest of being associated with these lads is the way they did stick together after what happened in that truncated season, and you know, 2021 were like with 4 league games, and I think had that have been 8 league games, we wouldn't have ended up where we did. But we got ourselves into that situation. But I think the way the lads stuck together, there was a maturity about that, but there was also a kind of a comeback last year. And I psychologically, I think probably the proudest thing I'd be, from my point of view, the fact that they stuck together. I didn't blame anybody. They said, we got ourselves into this, and they got themselves out of it. And I think that's incredibly pleasing from my point of view.
Yeah, sticking together is what it's all about, especially in a team, Paul. I suppose obviously you were kind of remarking there, like working with players. So, like when you're like individually working with a team or like players, like is it just going to like like is it like a coffee shop, or is it just one to one in a house, or your own clinic, or how's it all done?
Combination of all. Some players like different things. I suppose over the years with Sport Ireland, one of the things, because most of our athletes aren't based in Cavan anyway. Some are based in Dublin, but many of them are based abroad, or their own centres down in Cork, or they're in camp a lot of the time. So you kind of you get very comfortable with using Zoom and phone. You have to, because that's the way of it. Some players prefer that, and some players just have a wee pod and shed in the garden here, John, and some players like coming in here too. You really try to make it as kind of player focused. Most people, especially these days when it's safer to, most people do like when they have a chat and face to face. Generally one to one away from kind of town. There are a few players who wouldn't mind a coffee or whatever, but suppose you're always wearing Calvin. It's a kind of a small place, but generally offer phone Zoom one to ones here. Most people prefer one to ones for sure. Not nowadays, they do at least. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff, brilliant stuff. And I suppose obviously when you kind of see maybe players hitting their goals, reaching their targets, and I suppose doing what they're doing for their county and just being successful, Paul, I suppose obviously there's coaching that goes into it, there's strength and conditioning, there's fitness, there's absolutely everything that goes into it, Paul. But I suppose when you maybe see a player maybe get by a mental block or just achieve what they want to achieve, so how does that make you feel?
Well, it's the greatest. I mean, I think it's the greatest privilege. I think playing intercounty football these days it's a brave thing to do, because I don't know, John, if you're growing up, but certainly I think my memory of seeing county players when I was 12 or 13, and I grew up in an era of Joe Kernans and Fran McMahon, and they were like gods. It was like they were gods, and it was like the life was a lot more simple, straightforward. The season was much shorter. Whereas I think that there's two things that are really pressurised these days. Firstly, just the demands. And I know there's well documented debates in GA about demands on players, and obviously the split season has been a step in a positive direction in that regard. But I think just massive demands on players in terms of just your time, the amount of training they have to do, minding their eating, minding their sleeping, minding their mental health, all of their condition, stretch and roll, all of that kind of stuff, and being tip top in training. And when a team's going well, you need to be, particularly when a team's going well, you need to be 110% in training, because those games are so critical. That element's key. But the second thing, John, is I think social media and the dubious blessing that it is, and it is a dubious blessing as a psychologist. I mean, there's some days where definitely the downsides seem to outweigh the upsides.
Yeah.
But I think that the persona, these are amateur players. They're not being paid hundreds of grand every week, and they live within their communities. They do regular jobs and they work hard. And I think for those two reasons, the effort that they've got to put in to reach the level and keep that level, and secondly, the fact that they are to some degree for a game and social media, I think that's huge pressure. So I think anyone who does that's incredible. I think it's always important that people who come in, because every county is full of players, and I grew up with this myself, for players who could have been or might have been or weren't selected, or weren't related to the selector second cousin. But at the end of the day, you play for an inter-county team, you're making a massive effort, you are putting huge effort in, and you're vulnerable, because you're out there to be criticised, you're out there to be mocked, you're out there to be people pass comment, your family, your wife, your girlfriend, your partner, your mum and dad, your brothers, sisters read that stuff. So I think anyone who's brave enough to do that, I hugely admire them. I think secondly, the greatest privilege I've had, John, is to watch some of these people reach their potential, or get closer to their potential. I would like to think that this team haven't reached the potential just yet. I think there's more to come. I know that's to some extent my job, but to say that, but I do believe that, and I think that watching people become the best version of themselves that they can become, it's just a huge privilege. I think in terms of say the Olympic teams and performance, I think that the fascinating thing about that is the difference with the Olympics and say World Championships is amazing, that there's only a championship every 4 years. And I think that's even more to get it right, to do all those things and get it right. So in a sense, sometimes the Cavan had to say, what's the difference? And I said the difference with those athletes is there's only a championship every 4 years. Can you imagine what that would be like? So yeah, it's hugely huge privilege. But at the same time, John, we have a duty of care to players. We have a duty of care to give them support, resources, equip them to deal with what this involves physically, psychologically, every other way. So we have a duty of care to players to bring them through the system, but also to look after them once that's been achieved, or once they come to the end of their time. But it's the greatest kind of privilege just to watch somebody be the best version of themselves, be it sport or in life. It doesn't come much better than that, and I think that ultimately that's what kind of gets me out of the bed in the morning.
Obviously, Paul, I have to ask about the Together Stronger program that was around by Cavan GA last year, Paul. And obviously, you went around various clubs around Cavan, and obviously, it's just probably for the times we're in, Paul. I suppose obviously, unfortunately, we see so many people, unfortunately, taking their life these days, Paul, and kind of reaching rock bottom and just thinking that there's no way out when there's loads of ways out. And in each and every club in Cavan, Ireland, everywhere, Paul, there's probably a bit of an epidemic, and it probably is quite worrying and concerning at times. But Paul, obviously, that was great work you've done last year.
Yeah, it was an opportunity, and I think it's one of the best things about being involved with GAA, John, is that it is it's the largest community organisation in the country. Essentially, it's the one with the single identity, single set of values. And it's incredible. Again, we probably did during COVID give the GAA credit. I mean, even locally, Gaffney was used for a time as a test centre. But I just think being part of that, or was at a funeral a few weeks ago, and again just watching the local club take over all of that. I mean, people, we have something special in the GAA. And I suppose I was lucky to get an opportunity to volunteer with a group of volunteers as part of the Health and Wellbeing Committee, which Jerry Soden had led for so many years, led so well for so many years, and Tony Van came in more recently and has given equally steadfast leadership with a number of other great people, like Anne Fortune and Mark, the chairman, and Kevin Smith, which the late great Kevin Smith sadly passed away last week, among other people. And really what the Health and Wellbeing Committee felt that we needed to do something. We had to do something. Our rates of suicide among young people have been stubbornly high for many, many years. And I suppose for me it was interesting, John, in that it wasn't the first time we'd been at that juncture, in 2003. We had, again, similar enough statistics, to be honest, and Desi Farrell at the time was with the GPA, and we did a wee thing called Mind Yourself just prior to the All-Ireland final that year, and we got 4 players, Dermot McCabe, Peter Canavan, Kieran McGinney, and Desi himself, who's still with Dublin, to do a wee leaflet, and that actually morphed into a kind of a programme that we'd run in Cavan, Monaghan and Louthmeath through the HSE with the Suicide Foundation in Cork, and that had been hugely popular. And we aimed that mainly at transition year students, but we had full-time staff, and that ran from 2004, began in Cavan, Monaghan, and then extended to Meath and Louth, and then the country sort of ran out of money in 2008, and that was it. But I kind of knew there was potential for that kind of a programme, because Mind Yourself, we got that programme to 9,000 young people, so we knew there was potential, but it had to be done in a way that the message was given in places where young people would congregate, like clubs or teams, and that any one of us could be vulnerable. I think, John, one of the great myths about mental health is that somehow if you've got a mental health issue, there's two things. One is it's like having, a virus. You go in and you get an injection and the virus goes away and you're grand. It's not like that. It's messy. It's messy, and it's multifaceted. There's never just one issue, and people going through it are in an awful space. People watching loved ones go through it are in an awful space as well. The second thing I think is that, I've been privileged over the years to work with a lot of people who nearly killed themselves but didn't. And when you ask them what happened or what stopped or what, it was often something, maybe even coincidental, where somebody had said something. Somebody had said, "You drop around later on," or somebody had said, "Listen, I'll come in with that appointment tomorrow," or "Listen, drop around to our house for a bit of dinner later." But it was something that someone had done, usually unbeknownst to themselves, that they'd done something or said something or offered something, or maybe didn't say something to literally save a person's life, that one human being's reaction to another had a huge impact. And I think what we know about suicide and self-harm is that any of us are vulnerable, that people who are vulnerable to suicide, they're again, to move from that kind of illness model, they're not sitting there with, kind of wearing, casts or crutches. They're like you and me. They're normal people who have normal lives. And the problem is we don't know which one of us is vulnerable. So we knew that, if you can talk to people, educate people, give people I suppose, positions of influence in the community, and particularly clubs, sports coaches, managers, mentors, or even just friends, just give people the skills, give people the confidence, because ultimately, we are all in a position to save someone's life. And when you look at people who come through that kind of hardship, it was always because there was one key relationship. A lot of people with difficult family circumstances, and there may not have been support at home. And for those people, it could have been a sports coach, it could have been a school teacher, it could have been a person on the team, it could have been somebody at work. So really, John, what we tried to do then was the idea itself then was that we needed to do something. And the problem with middle-aged fellas like me is you might find my views on mental health interesting, but your average 17-year-old doesn't find me interesting at all. And you've got to make it more relevant, in both in terms of who gives the message and as to what the message is. So again, with great help from the committee, in December 21, we put together a video, and we had two of our all-stars, Park Faulkner and Greg Callaghan, with Shane Carthy from St Vincent's in Dublin came down, who'd written a great book on mental health, and Aaron Galligan from Crusher Law came in as well, and we made a video basically talking about the programme. I think that got good coverage on social media. So it meant,
and rightly so, Paul, and rightly so, yeah.
Very much so. So yeah, we started. We did 3 virtual sessions in January 21, and then we had 9 centres around the county when we could go back to face later in the spring. So we've almost 500 people trained in the approach, and basically all it is, it's called Stronger because we just want people to feel stronger in themselves and to feel stronger when able to reach out to people. And where we got the idea for Stronger was we looked at the 8 reasons why people most often give when they take their own lives. And there were things like feeling that no matter what they do, it won't make any difference. It's hopelessness, feeling that they've done something wrong and whatever they do won't change it. A lot of people feel lonely, and a lot of people feel that they just can't face life, they just can't go on. So we took those 8 reasons and we paired them with a skill. And the skills are things like let people tell their story. No 2 stories are the same. We throw in things that are about being open-minded. A lot of people struggle these days with issues and shame around addiction, worrying that, for example, if people knew the addiction problem, a lot of people also worry about how families may react if they talk about how they truly feel about their gender or how they truly feel about their sexuality. All of those kind of issues, be open-minded. Also things about review and rehearse. One of the skills we teach is about if you don't write things down and check things, you'll never get much of a handle on them. Rehearse. Everything in life is a skill that we can learn, that can be practiced. If you're going to ask somebody how they're feeling, if you're asking someone, have they had feelings of killing themselves, that's something you can rehearse and practice. So we kind of put it together. And essentially what it is, John, it's an effort that if you or me were in the wrong place at the wrong time without the right help, that somebody who maybe had the confidence or had the relationship with you, or knew that they could ask a question without doing any harm, and maybe for somebody that could make a difference, and that could for somebody in the wrong place at the wrong time without the right kind of resources, that could keep someone alive. So we had a meeting recently trying to roll it out, promote it further, maybe look at a younger version. I've with the underage teams now, with Andre's help, and again with Porrick and Ray, we've ran the skills program we're developing for our underage teams. And that Stronger is one of the, we've 12 skills we teach, but Stronger is one of the self-care skills we teach. So I think it's very powerful for these young lads who are coming in to represent Cavan and those developing underage teams to see the likes of Porrick, Faulkner, Ray Gallagher talk about these issues. It's very, very powerful. So again, the players and the senior players in particular have been very, very supportive. And again, at the end of the day, we have some of the best athletes I've ever worked with. We've some of the, we've all stars, we've provincial champions. We've some of the, these are people who have standing. These are people who have influence, and these are people who are who people will listen to, especially younger people. So we're just fantastic, and without the support of the players, we couldn't do it. But we're hoping to extend it on, and the County Council honoured us by there's a community awards event happening in Dublin, the 21st of January, and the County Council honoured us by nominating Stronger in one of the Spirit awards. So they felt that it was something that was useful and could be replicated. But John, we have to do our bit, and I suppose as a mental health professional as well, like the system of waiting in clinics for people to show up just isn't working. It never worked when I was there, which was always, I suppose, why we looked at all of it as I bring the message over. But we have to do better. For some people, that's what they need. For some people, that's exactly they need intensive input. The resources need to be there. But the people we really worry about are the people who've never had the chance. And sadly, all too sadly, in this county, we've had too many people, younger people especially, who've taken their own lives where there wasn't a chance of that conversation. And the more we can do that, we are a large community group, we have some influence, so we will hopefully promote that on, and hopefully maybe this year with a wee bit of support from some of the bigger organisations statutory wise, we might roll it out further.
Yeah, that's absolutely essential, Paul. And I suppose, like, realistically, you've been involved with teams, I've been involved with teams, and look, you're probably seeing lads at training sessions and games and maybe on a night out, and like, I think it feels very artificial because you're just seeing up the game and how are you, like, how did that night out go, or oh god, you kicked a good point at the weekend. But like, you always hear the expression, like, you might meet someone on the street, oh well, Paul, how are you? Oh, that's grand. Like, you don't really know how a player is, a manager is, and like, a team can consist of 30, 40 people, and realistically, Paul, unless there's a psychologist in or someone working with the players, you don't really know how anyone is. And then you get a phone call, someone shares something online that, this man's after doing this, and what we've done. So like, there's so much more that can still be done, Paul.
Oh, there is, and I think it's on such a good point you make. Like we make. We work all the time on the basis of incomplete information. We had a brilliant speaker in Sport Ireland Institute back in September, a lady called Grace French, who is American activist, but she's part of a group called Army of Survivors, and Army of Survivors were the women and children who were sexually abused by Larry Nassar, the Michigan doctor and American Olympic doctor, over many years, and it was quite a big trial a few years ago, and these women have come together, and the whole idea about how could these awful things happen, and Grace was making the point that bottom line is, always assume that the person you're dealing with, that there's something going on that could be awful, could be horrible. That person closes their eyes at night, God knows what they're looking into, and just encouraging us. And one of the coaches, high performance directors, was saying, should we nearly assume that everyone you work with, that there could be something going on? And she said, absolutely, because, you know, how else will you know? And I think, John, what it is it's just leaving room for the possibility that maybe things aren't just 100% right. And the funny thing about teams and coaches and stuff, like, a lot of the great coaches I work with, you know, they might say something like, God, Paul was very quiet at training last night, or he didn't say anything, but it was just the way he was running. Look, he didn't quite look like himself. So people in sports sometimes have a view of a person that might be a wee bit unique. Now, the person might say, Paul might say, no, I'm grand, and what are you picking on me for? But there might just be an instinct. So I think definitely we need to do more. But I think it's just that sense, John, that everyone you meet in life, if you say to yourself, I wonder, is there something going on with that person that if I knew what was going on, if it was a financial issue or a row at home, or you know, worry about something they'd done, or worry about something that was coming up, I wonder would I treat them differently. I think if we all did that, like, life is difficult, life is hard, but I think if we all assume that every time you communicate with someone, especially a loved one who you might live with, but you can never tell what people are thinking, just say, God, I wonder if maybe there's something wrong with that person. You know, we might be a bit kinder and more thoughtful. And I think the second thing, and this probably morphs more into performance, John, as well, is that almost always most of our distress in life is to do with something that's happened in the past, or being overwhelmed by a worry or an anxiety that it can happen again. And certainly from a mental health point of view, since COVID, anxiety is the most prevalent presentation that people will be seeing in HSC clinics and mental health settings for children and adults. And secondly, people are sometimes, if they're not overwhelmed by the past, they're worried about making a mistake or worried that something's going to happen again. They can be overcome by fears of the future. And one of the absolute certainties of performance psychology is helping the people stay in the present moment. And if you can do that, and you know, if there's something about the past that's overwhelming you, is there something you can do about it, but not at that moment? And if there's something about the future, is there something you can do, but not at that moment? But if you can just stay in the present moment and not be overwhelmed, because most of our distress either comes from the past or the future. And a future, maybe, you know, there's an old saying in our business that most of the awful things in my life never happened, but I thought they could happen, and that kind of spoiled it, took it for me. So that kind of goes back to your awareness and mindful kind of idea, that if you could focus in the present moment. But certainly, John, and I think, you know, we have a long way to come. You know, I think that I'd be an advocate for, you know, again, if we can bring these kind of interventions and skills, you know, life is difficult and life is changing all the time. And if my young daughter turned 15 yesterday, and you know, you're looking at, you know, the world that she, like, we didn't have phones. There was a phone at home, and there was no mobile phone, there was no stuff, you know, even dealing with that, managing that. When do you turn it on, when do you turn it off, how can you tell if somebody's means something that maybe they didn't mean, or whatever? But it is about giving people skills. But I think, you know, for me, the sports plays such a pivotal role. And again, I come into this area because I saw sport as the intervention that so many kids over the years, I would have said to parents, get them into a team, get them to learn a wee bit of confidence, get them to get a bit of skill. And the great thing about team sport, John, is like if you've played in any team, you know, an under-8s team or a senior team, you're going to see all of life. You know, you're going to have good days and bad. There'll be times when you do much better than you thought you do. There'll be times you do much worse. But you learn about losing, you learn about defeat, and you somehow learn in teams that if you stick together and you're not on your own, that you can overcome most things. And I think that's where team sport and sport generally is so effective. And for me, I've come at this as sport in itself as the intervention, but I think we've a long way to come in Ireland. I mean, for example, you know, if you look at the situation we have at the moment, where you've people out the door in trolleys, and yet the corporately we're 5 billion surplus on the tax side. Like, I know if it was up to me, people sometimes say, if you had a magic wand, what would you do about youth mental health? It's really simple. I'd make sure that everyone between 16 and 19, or 15 and 19, or 15 and 20 had to be either in education, in school, or in the training program, or if not in the military, in one of the services, because we lose young people around 15 or 16. The dropout rate, even in our own GAA, I mean, Dara Sheridan, who is actually back with Irish Rugby. Great guy who did a fabulous piece of research in the GAA, the Super Game Centres, which is a fabulous initiative to get young people back into sport. Dara would have spent 5 years over in New Zealand, and he's back with head of coaching with RFU. A great appointment, great guy. But his research would have shown that between 13 and 21, we're losing, some cases over 50% of young people from the GAA. So if we can keep our teams, let teams come and play, enjoy that, give them that. That's the first thing we can do. Involve them, include them. But John, I think the second thing, I'd be some form of kind of almost national service that if you keep everyone at 15, keep them in something, give them a job, give them a training course, pay them enough so they can have their own place, and basically don't let go of them. I think that would make a huge difference. But at the minute, it's scary for young people because it does feel like every man and woman for themselves at times, and there's a lot more we can do. But I think there's a lot more different we can do. But I think just the GAA and all of our games in every sport is massively helpful for people. And I suppose stronger is just a wee bit more of a specialist thing, but we can all play our part. And again, almost always for people I've talked to who did think of killing themselves and didn't, it wasn't necessarily the mental health professional that had the key conversation.
I suppose, Paul, obviously, like anytime anything does happen with a young person that sadly passed away due to suicide, and we always kind of say, oh, look, take care of yourselves. And Cavan has probably been badly hit maybe in the last 2 to 3 years, even longer, Paul, and it's probably only until something next happens. So do you maybe feel it's a conversation maybe within, I know obviously you guys are doing fantastic work, but like even GA clubs set up even workshops within clubs to talk each month to players, supporters, managers, everyone involved within the community, because I think that could be the start of something too.
I think it is, John. I think that's certainly part of it. But what gets people through a lot of the time, you're thinking, like, you're looking at this week, like, when my daughter was back to school this morning, and kind of you're just looking at a lot of people this week, was kind of, none of us were maybe hopping out of bed, and but there's two things. One, we went through it together. We all kind of had to go through this week together, paying bills with that haven't landed yet, thinking about that. But also, John, the fact that there's ways of getting through weeks like this, and I think if we stick together and do that, I think routine and structure, just as a basis, any kind of trauma or upset, you keep routine and structure going for people. It works really, really well. It's funny, some of the teams, sadly, over the past couple of years, where they have lost players, and we've had more than our fair share in Cavan of that. When you go and beat those teams and the managers, one of the key messages was always keep it going, keep training going, keep it normal. We'll have our time to speak about the player who's gone. We'll have a way of remembering them. We'll definitely grieve properly and grieve well, and we'll do the funeral, we'll do it right. We'll always keep them in our minds, and we'll have ways of remembering them, maybe return a jersey, whatever. But beyond that, just routine and structure, normal stuff. And that, for any of us, when things go wrong or difficulty, sometimes it's almost just having that normal routine and structure. And again, by tomorrow, we'll probably have people saying, God, I'm glad I'm back, or I was back into it. But just, when we go through things together, and we use routine and structure to keep us focused on a kind of a bigger goal, I think that's hugely cathartic and therapeutic for people. And I think by just being available, by giving people a place to go, a team to be part of, an identity to have, but more than anything, I think, John, that if just bearing in mind that you never know the person next to you training or in the team, you just never know what they might be going through. And can we, is it possible? Is it possible that somehow we can stop every single person from doing that? I wish I could tell you I thought it was, but I don't know. I've seen in my own career when maybe once where I've lost a person I worked with and tried to help, and they killed themselves anyway. That sometimes there may not be, but it's our job to make sure that we give every opportunity. And I think all of these programs, Stronger, the workshops you're mentioning, the bringing in guest speakers, everything everything has to be tried, because different things work with different people. Some people aren't that verbal, some people prefer one-to-one, some people prefer groups. But I think John wants to be keeping, I just, be compassionate toward yourself, be compassionate to the next person, but I think always bear in mind that there could be something that maybe that person is carrying that might just be too heavy. And John, I think that's the thing. And I think if we bring that mindset into it, and again, that's completely allied with high performance. You make people feel safe enough to make a mistake, and that your mistake's my mistake, magic starts to happen on the performance side as well.
Absolutely, Paul. Absolutely. I suppose you've been brilliant with your time, Paul. Last kind of question: what's the goals and aspirations for the years ahead? Obviously, 2023. Obviously, hopefully have a successful year, Cavan, and further afield.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly, McCavan. I'm delighted. It was always going to come that they'd play Armagh in the championship, and this was so. I have a lot of friends planning. I've actually a lot of friends coming down for the McKenna Cup game. So people from home coming down. So they're really looking forward. They have to beat Antrim first in the championship, but if they do beat Antrim, they're planning a big weekend in Cavan. So obviously that's great. But I'm really looking forward to it, because I think our history in Ulster is that we've some great runs, beaten, going into first round games, we're completely written off. Bottom line is we're going to be completely written off anyway. It's perfect, absolutely perfect. So from a Cavan point of view, we'll be given no chance. But these are a special group of players, special management team, and I'd be very hopeful of seeing these guys fulfil their potential, however far that would take them. But it couldn't be, John. If you'd have said to me we had to go back to, say, play the team, say, go back to Antrim again, this is the draw I wanted. We always do better when we get right back into the heat of the kitchen. First game, no excuses, and we're right up against it. And I think history has shown that this group of players is what probably they thrive at that kind of level. So to see those fellas go and fulfill their potential as far as it'll take them, I suppose there's a lot of we've a really good cohort of athletes coming through, a lot of younger athletes coming through in sports for 2023. We're very strong, obviously, with boxing and rowing, and we know that traditionally very strong, but a lot of other young athletes coming through for the first time probably in a few years. We've a few new athletes, runners coming through was huge, kind of hope for them. But I think for a small country, we've a lot of really exciting Olympic prospects. So this is a big year for them. In many cases, to try to qualify, get through. And I suppose from just a personal point of view, they just want to continue to enjoy and learn myself. And I think that the one thing that this kind of work does is that you're only as good as your last consult, you're only as good as your last session, for just to kind of continue in that vein and move on. I just hope that we've a kind of a great season ahead, Sean. Definitely.
Great stuff, Paul. Well, I wish you the very, very best luck this year, and a very happy new year. And of course, Paul, thanks a million for joining me this week. And of course, this podcast is brought to you by orgarich.com. Use the promo code JMac podcast to get 15% off on the website. Paul, you're an absolute gentleman. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sean. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.